Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello, I'm Tian Wei, and welcome to World Insight. We begin with a look at the summit between Chinese and EU leaders. Chinese President Xi Jinping met with the European Council President and the European Commission President via video link on Friday during the 23rd China-EU leaders meeting. This is the first China-EU summit since 2020 and comes amid conflicts between Russia and Ukraine. President Xi from China said that under the current circumstances, China and the EU should increase communication to secure global peace and development and play a stabilizing role in a turbulent world. He also stressed that China-EU cooperation has achieved new results amid difficulties. Earlier today, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang held an online meeting with both top EU leaders as well. Premier Li from China said China supports a peaceful resolution to the Ukraine crisis and is willing to play a constructive role to promote peace talks. China and the EU also agreed on strengthening dialogue, deepening cooperation, and upholding multilateralism. More on China-EU summit. Joining us in Rome, Michele Gallacci, the former Undersecretary of the Italian Ministry of Economic Development. Good to see you, sir. Long time no see. And also in Beijing, with me in the studio, Professor Wang Yiwei, Jean Monnet Chair Professor and Director of the Center for EU Studies at Renmin University of China. Gentlemen, what a pleasure to have both of you reunited in this program. Finally, we could talk about Europe. But of course, this is with the backdrop of Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, Professor Wang, tell me more about how do you see the readout coming from the Chinese side in any way indicate that the two sides, China and EU, might be coming closer with one another?
I think quite close on the successful summit because they go beyond the three hot pot issues. Firstly, not hijacked by the Ukraine crisis. Look at the big picture, how solve the problem, not just blame each other. Secondly, not hijacked by the single member state of the European Union, like Luxembourg. And thirdly, not hijacked by the single issue like human rights, Xinjiang issue, and sanctions, anti-sanctions. So looking forward of the future cooperation and the dynamic resilience of the trade issue and also human rights dialogue separately and political dialogue, human people-to-people dialogue as well.
So you are saying that the two sides, at least during this meeting, has managed to focus on the big issues as a whole, rather than only focusing on one or two, so that it's a comprehensive talk that they're having. Professor Gallacci, is that your thinking?
Slightly different. You are right in a way. They did talk about many things, and when you talk about many things, it's easier to agree because maybe one side agree on half of them and the other side agree on half of the other half, which is much better than just discuss one topic, which would be divisive. I did, however, because I've also spoken to some people just a few minutes ago, and there was an intense pressure on the EU side to actually bring the human rights, the usual issues, Xinjiang and so on, up to the center of the discussion, and also, but this is usual, so I'm not too worried about that. The President von der Leyen has, in a way, insisted that China should take active action to help solve the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, to the point that the EU, not quite threatened, but let's say strongly invited China not to step in the middle between the sanctions that the EU has placed on Russia. In other words, I understand, I translated, China should limit purchases of gas and oil from Russia, because in the EU side, this would be seen as infringing or making the sanctions weaker. So quite a strong invitation that, you're Chinese. China does not really like to be told by other countries what they should do. So I think there is a little bit of communication and cultural gap that still needs to be solved. And that's what we try to do.
I can tell, Mr. Gallacci, you are putting it in a very diplomatic way already. Of course, there are differences, and that's why talks and discussions are extremely crucial, particularly now. Professor Wang, on the Russia-Ukraine issue, now we see Europe earlier at the very beginning of the conflict, very emotional, of course, until today. Given the historical ties, given the direct impact the European continent is likely to have as a result. But on the other hand, it is much a sobering thinking right now because some have been suggesting about the self-inflicted economic difficulties as a result of sanctions against Russia. There's also dependency on Russia and the EU countries together over the decades. So now, Professor Wang, how do you see the complex emotions, shall we say, and also thinking that the European countries have from China's perspective?
After 1 month, even more of the war and the sanctions, and the Europeans felt fatigued about that. They should get out from this worst scenario. They try to understand the Chinese position, not too much emotionally, that combine China and Russia. China and Russia, actually, the new type of power relations is not just ally, it's, they have a bottom line that's based on the UN that respect the sovereignty of territory. I think that's firstly. Secondly,
I just want to make sure what you're saying, they are not allies. That's what you're trying to say, right?
Yes.
Mr. Wang, okay, go ahead.
Secondly, China's foreign policy is very independent, not just either join the Western bloc with the sanctions to Russia or support Russia. These are two. Either or scenario is not the case.
Yeah.
China is always midway to independently to deal with both Russia and the European Union. So
The
that's very
nuances
important.
are very important, and that is why talks are of great significance. It's not just China, India as well. For example, the economic and trade ties India with Russia, the energy ties, and also the history ties, the geopolitical ties. So in that regard, China is not a single case standing up, but rather indicating the complex situation. Having said that, though, Mr. Geraghty, it is a Russia-Ukraine issue, but not necessarily just about that, because the issue is big only because it's having rippling effect in so many different areas. So now, Professor Geraghty, do you see now Europe is becoming more sober in terms of the solutions?
A little bit. There is indeed some emotions because, of course, when we see people dying on the street, emotions dominate. Of course, now we have a debate in Italy and Europe about sanctions, yes or no. And I have a different view than what you may hear. I believe that these economic sanctions are not really working to the goal of stopping the war. And these are sanctions that hurt Europe more than it hurts Russia. And we are seeing these day by day developing. And so we in Europe start to think that maybe we need to find alternative ways. And this is now when China comes into play. Because while at the beginning people were insisting for China to take an active role to condemn, while China has rightly kept the neutrality, now this neutrality can come to help as a mediator. Because only if you are neutral, you can mediate. So our sanctions are not so effective. And again, you would hear different things. That's not true. We did the analysis. We have to rely on the Russian gas. We cannot do without it. And therefore, in electoral democracy, when the economy starts to suffer, the political consensus for insisting on sanctions that hurt low-end, low-income people who see gas prices, electricity prices going up diminishes. And so I think now it's the time for a kind, maybe invitation for China, who has a good relationship, like we heard, with both parties, to step in also because China trades 50 billion with Russia, 10 billion with Ukraine, import of agricultural commodities. So it is in China's interest to make sure that everything stabilizes because China cares about economic prosperity.
It is an evolving situation, Professor Geraghty, as you just put it. And also you see the shuttling diplomacy involving China, India, and some of the other players as well who have been talking to Russia. Of course, Washington has no access to Russia at this moment almost, and therefore you cannot depend on that. So having said that, though, What about the other important issues on China-EU's agenda? You know, the comprehensive trade deal on investment has been very much under discussion for years, under political ups and downs over the past few years. Now, Professor Wang, how far are we now still from there?
I think the European Union now understands more than before after this conflict in Ukraine, the importance of China and EU relations, particularly in the trade investment. Firstly, last year, EU back to be #1 trade partner for China. Actually, in the past 16 years before, only replaced by ASEAN, because of COVID-19. So growing very rapidly, still very dynamic and resilient. And for European Union, the suffered of the side effect of the sanctions to Russia. The need to go beyond of that. So need also the energy transformation, economic recession to deal with that, and they need China's cooperation. I think very important. I think also for China to boom the economy and to also for the climate change deal, overcome the hot issues in the world.
Professor Ghilarchi, China's economic size now almost in parallel with that of the EU. Of course, this does not necessarily mean a dramatic transformation, but this could mean a different way of consultation and interaction with one another. Now, Professor Ghilarchi, under these circumstances, how do you see this bilateral investment treaty and also other agreements and deals that should long be reached?
I think the investment agreement, you are right, Tianwei, is in the interest of both. It has, however, met some political obstacles a year and a half ago, and so it has a little bit been parked. Now, this does not mean that the two blocs do not trade or do not invest in each other. The CAI was offering a framework, a protection, some kind of a reference to which companies could refer to in case of a problem. A little bit like the MOU on the Belt and Road that Italy happily did when I was in the government, to offer companies a umbrella under which they can cooperate, and also to stimulate them to do business with each other. So the fact that the CIA is not being approved and signed yet does not worry me too much, because companies do see the opportunities. I do see that, especially when we have a weak economic situation in Europe,
right.
European company, German company, French company, Italian company do look at the Chinese market with a strong interest. So the reality, I think, now is almost more important than the formality of the agreement.
Miguel Ghilarchi, Wang Yiwei, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. Appreciate it.